I had always believed I was a cautious driver. It was a trait my mother instilled in me from the moment I got my license. Her voice echoed in my mind that night as I drove home from a late dinner with friends. Stick to well-lit roads, always keep your phone charged, and never stop for anyone unless it's the police. It was around midnight and the highway stretched out before me, empty and dark. I was 20 miles from home when I noticed the faint glow of red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. Instinct took over. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder just as you're supposed to do. The cruiser pulled up behind me. I could barely make out the silhouette of the officer as he approached my car, his flashlight cutting through the dark. When he knocked on the window, I rolled it down just a crack. "License and registration," he demanded. His voice was cold, mechanical, almost as if he had rehearsed it. Something didn't feel right. I glanced at him. His uniform looked official enough at first glance, but the badge on his chest seemed odd. The engraving was faint, the edges uneven. His name tag simply read, Officer Smith. My heart began to race. I had met my share of officers before, and this didn't feel right. He wasn't looking me in the eye, and his posture felt tense. Predatory, almost. "What's the problem, officer?" I asked cautiously. "You were speeding," he replied flatly. "Step out of the vehicle." Speeding? I had been driving well under the limit. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Could I see your badge number?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a beat of silence. His expression didn't change. The flashlight beam shifted slightly, reflecting off my side mirror. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his tone sharp. Every instinct screamed at me to drive away. My pulse thundered in my ears as I slowly reached for the gear shift. His hand suddenly shot out, grabbing the door handle. "Duck," she hissed. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as my car lurched forward. In my rearview mirror, I saw him stumble backward before running to his cruiser. The chase was on. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The dark highway blurred around me as I sped into the night. My phone lay on the passenger seat, vibrating with missed calls from my friends. I hadn't even thought to grab it. All I could think about was escape. I glanced behind me. The unmarked cruiser was gaining. His headlights flashed, blinding me momentarily. I veered onto a side road, hoping to lose him in the maze of back roads. The pavement turned to gravel and the car skidded as I took a sharp turn. I couldn't see him anymore. My breath came in ragged gasps. I drove for what felt like hours before finally pulling into the parking lot of a well-lit gas station. I parked in the corner, heart racing, eyes darting around for any sign of pursuit. When I was sure I wasn't followed, I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. I told her everything. She listened patiently before asking, "Did the officer provide a badge number or show any official identification?" "No," I whispered. "I don't think he was a real cop." She promised to send a patrol car to my location and took down all the details I could provide. It felt like hours before a real officer arrived, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. He assured me that they would investigate, but when I mentioned the unmarked car, he frowned. "There were no patrols scheduled in this area tonight," he said. "No one should have been pulling you over." I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside made my heart leap. By morning, I convinced myself that the worst was over, that I was safe. I was wrong. A few days later, I noticed a car parked down the street from my house. It was subtle at first, an old sedan with dark windows. At first, I thought nothing of it, but it kept showing up, different times of day, always the same spot. One afternoon, I decided to walk past it, pretending to check my mail. My stomach churned when I saw the faint outline of a figure in the driver's seat. The moment I glanced his way, the car roared to life and sped off. My heart dropped into my stomach. I called the police again. They sent another officer, a younger man this time, who took my statement but seemed unconvinced. "Could be a coincidence," he said, "but we'll keep an eye out." The next night, I woke up to the sound of knocking. 3 sharp raps on my front door. I froze, my breath hitching. The clock read 3:14 a.m. I crept to the window, my hands shaking, and peeked through the blinds. A man stood on my porch. He was wearing a police uniform. My blood turned to ice. It was him. The same hollow expression, the same ill-fitting uniform, the same fake badge. He didn't move. He didn't knock again. He just stood there. I backed away from the window, my heart racing. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I dialed 911. I whispered into the receiver, my voice barely audible. "Someone's outside my house. He's pretending to be a cop. He's here." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher instructed. "Officers are on their way." The minutes dragged like hours. I crouched behind my couch, eyes fixed on the front door. The knocking started again, slow, deliberate, then silence. When the real police arrived, he was gone. They found footprints leading from my porch to the side of the house. The officer looked me in the eye and said, "You need to stay somewhere else for a while. This isn't random." I packed a bag that night and went to stay with my sister. The police increased patrols in my neighborhood, but they never found him. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually the fear dulled. Life resumed its normal rhythm. But I never forgot the way his eyes had followed me that night. Even now, every time I see a police car, I feel that familiar chill. Is it him? Is he watching? Will he knock again? The worst part? I'll never know if he was caught. Because sometimes monsters wear uniforms. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I first heard the knock. I was in my dorm room, half asleep, headphones on, and the glow of my computer screen the only light. The halls outside were silent, as they always were that late at night. Most students were long asleep. The knock was sharp and deliberate, 3 quick raps against the door. At first I ignored it, assuming it was a prank or someone looking for the wrong room. But then it came again. Louder, more insistent. I pulled off my headphones, heart thudding as I sat up straighter. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly from grogginess. "Police," a man's voice answered. "We need to talk to you about a noise complaint. Open the door." I blinked, confused. A noise complaint? I'd been quiet all night, just scrolling through videos and studying. I didn't even have my music playing loud. I walked over to the door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Something about the voice on the other side made my skin crawl. It was deep and authoritative, but it lacked a certain calm professionalism I had always associated with law enforcement. "What's the complaint?" I asked. "Open the door," he repeated. "Now!" A chill ran down my spine. I pressed my eye to the peephole and peered through. The man outside wore a dark blue uniform that looked vaguely like a police officer's, but something was wrong. The badge on his chest was dull and poorly stamped. His name tag simply read, "Officer Daniels," but it looked crooked, as if it had been pinned on hastily. "Do you have a badge number?" I asked, my voice tightening with suspicion. There was a long pause, then, "Step away from the door or I'll break it down." My heart jumped. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This wasn't right. I grabbed my phone from the bed and dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I held it to my ear. 911, what's your emergency?" a calm, female voice answered. "There's someone outside my dorm," I whispered. "He says he's a cop, but I don't think he is. He's trying to get in." "Stay on the line," she said. "Do not open the door. Officers are on their way. Can you describe him?" I turned back to the peephole. The man was still there, but now he was leaning closer, his eyes almost level with mine. His gaze was cold and predatory, like a wolf sizing up its prey. "He's wearing a fake uniform," I whispered. "He's tall, white, maybe mid-30s, short hair, no real badge or anything." The dispatcher stayed on the line, her voice steady, but my heart was racing too fast to focus on her words. Suddenly, the door rattled violently as the man slammed into it with his shoulder. "Open up," he shouted. I backed into the corner of my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My mind raced through my options. There was only one way out: the window. But I was on the second floor. A fall from that height could break something. The door shook again, harder this time, and I heard a crack as the frame began to splinter. Desperation clawed at my chest. I ran to my desk, grabbed a heavy metal lamp, and held it like a bat, my knuckles white with fear. "I've called the cops," I yelled. "They're coming." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my stomach twist. "Do you think they'll get here in time?" Another slam. The door buckled. One more hit, and it would burst open. I glanced at the window. It wasn't a choice anymore. I dropped the lamp, threw open the window, and climbed onto the narrow ledge. The cold night air bit into my skin as I swung my legs over. Behind me, I heard the door crash open. "Where do you think you're going?" his voice growled. I didn't look back. I pushed off the ledge and fell. The world spun around me as I hit the ground hard, pain exploding in my ankle. I bit back a scream, scrambled to my feet, and started limping across the campus. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my leg, but adrenaline kept me moving. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, determined, and my blood ran cold. "Stop," he barked. "Come back here." I pushed myself harder, my breath ragged. Lights from the campus security building flickered ahead, a beacon of safety. I waved my arms frantically as I stumbled toward it. "Help!" I screamed. "Someone's after me!" A figure emerged from the building, a real security guard, his flashlight cutting through the dark. He ran toward me, shouting into his radio. The fake officer slowed, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. The real police arrived minutes later. I sat in the security office, trembling as I recounted everything to the officers. They asked for every detail: the man's description, his voice, the way he forced his way in. Their expressions darkened as I spoke. "You're lucky," one of them said gravely. "This isn't the first time we've heard about someone posing as an officer around here. A few students have gone missing in the past couple of months." My stomach turned. "Did they find them?" The officer hesitated, then shook his head. "We're still looking." For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every noise, every creak in the dorm made my heart race. I double-checked the locks on my door every night and kept my phone within arm's reach. One night, just as I was starting to feel normal again, there was another knock. Slow, deliberate. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "It's campus security," a voice said. "We need to talk to you." I stared at the door, my hands trembling. I never opened it. It was a little after midnight when Sarah and Mike found themselves driving through a desolate forest road, the kind where the trees grew so thick that even moonlight struggled to filter through. They were returning from a weekend getaway, the glow of the dashboard casting faint shadows across their tired faces. The drive should have been peaceful, but there was something unnervingly quiet about the road. Not a single car in sight, and the only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath their tires and the occasional rustling of unseen animals. Sarah glanced at Mike, her fingers nervously drumming on the door handle. "Are you sure this is the right way? It feels like we've been driving forever." Mike, gripping the wheel a little too tightly, gave a reassuring smile. "The GPS says it's a shortcut. We'll be back on the main road soon, don't worry." But worry settled in her chest like a stone. A few minutes later, red and blue flashing lights appeared ahead, illuminating the fog-drenched road. A single patrol car was parked sideways, blocking their path. Two figures stood by the vehicle, their dark uniforms barely distinguishable in the dim light. "Finally, some sign of life," Mike muttered, easing the car to a stop. One of the officers, a tall man with a stiff posture, stepped forward, waving a flashlight in slow, deliberate motions. His partner hung back, his face obscured by the shadow of his cap. As the officer approached, Sarah felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Something was off. The patrol car had no license plate. "Good evening," the man said, his voice calm but rehearsed. "We're conducting a routine check. Mind rolling down your window?" Mike hesitated but complied, lowering the window halfway. The officer leaned in, the beam of his flashlight darting across their faces. "Where are you folks coming from?" he asked, his tone casual but with an edge that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "Just heading home," Mike answered. "Is there a problem?" The officer ignored the question. "Who knows you're out here tonight?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. That wasn't a normal question. She shot Mike a warning glance as the second officer circled the car, peering in through her window. His eyes were cold and unblinking, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Can we see your identification?" the first officer asked. Mike reached for his wallet, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at their uniforms." Her voice was low, but the officer heard. His expression darkened. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his calm demeanor slipping. Mike's instincts kicked in. He shifted the car into reverse, his foot hovering over the pedal. "I think we'll just be on our way." "That wasn't a request," the officer growled. Suddenly, the second man banged on Sarah's window, making her jump. His hand went to his belt, not for a badge, but for a weapon. Mike slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching as they sped backward. The officer shouted, raising his gun. A shot rang out, the sound tearing through the night. The rear tire exploded, sending the car skidding into a ditch. "Get out! Run!" Mike yelled. They scrambled from the car, hearts pounding as adrenaline surged through their veins. The imposters gave chase, their heavy footsteps echoing in the darkness. The forest swallowed them whole, branches clawed at their clothes, and the ground was a treacherous maze of roots and rocks. Mike limped, his ankle twisted, but he urged Sarah forward. "Keep going, don't stop." Behind them, the men shouted threats. "You can't hide forever, we'll find you." Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed deeper into the woods. Her heart thundered in her ears, drowning out rational thought. She tripped, falling hard against the ground. Pain flared in her palms, but when she looked up, her blood ran cold. A shallow grave lay before her, filled with personal belongings. Phones, wallets, keys, all discarded like forgotten memories. Among them was a rusted Mike, she whispered, horror tightening her throat. "Look!" He crouched beside her, his eyes widening. "Oh God!" The realization hit them both. They weren't the first. A snapping twig broke the silence. The imposters were close. Too close. They sprinted again, their lungs burning as fear fueled their flight. The trees thinned, revealing a steep ravine. Trapped. The imposters closed in, their faces twisted with cruel intent. "It's over," one of them sneered. "No one's coming to save you." Mike, despite his injury, grabbed a large branch and swung it with all his strength. The first man staggered, falling backward. Sarah seized her chance. She lunged forward and shoved the second man, sending him toppling into the ravine. His scream faded into the darkness below. Sirens pierced the night. Flashing lights appeared through the trees as real police officers descended upon the scene. The remaining imposter tried to flee, but he was quickly tackled and handcuffed. Sarah and Mike collapsed, trembling with relief as they were led to safety. In the ambulance, wrapped in blankets, they clung to each other, the weight of their survival sinking in. A detective approached, his expression grim. "We've been tracking these guys for months. They've been preying on travelers. You're lucky you got away." The couple exchanged a look, haunted by the knowledge that others hadn't been so fortunate. As they drove away, Sarah cast one last glance at the darkened forest. The graves would be found, the truth would come to light, but the terror of that night, the lies, the flashing lights, and the chase would stay with them forever.